Reginald Thompson, a black man in a wrinkled jacket, stood in a cockpit doorway. Captain Bradley Whitmore's smirk vanished. The flight attendant's jaw dropped. What started as a humiliating moment in economy class had just become the most expensive mistake of Bradley's career. But nobody saw this coming. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you love stories about justice and unexpected twists, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. Reginald Thompson sat in seat 34B, his tall, lean frame folded into the cramped economy class seat with practiced ease. At 52 years old, his salt and pepper hair was cut close to his scalp, neat and professional despite the exhaustion that lined his face. His gold-rimmed glasses sat slightly crooked on his nose, and he pushed them up absently as he settled into his seat. The jacket he wore was wrinkled from 3 consecutive days of meetings in Chicago, the fabric creased in ways that suggested it had been slept in at least once. His khaki pants had seen better days, the hem slightly frayed at the edges, and his leather shoes, once expensive, now bore the scuff marks and wear of countless miles traveled. He looked nothing like the man he truly was. And that was perfectly fine with him. The Boeing 737 hummed with the familiar pre-flight chaos of passengers cramming oversized bags into overhead compartments, parents trying to settle restless children, and flight attendants weaving through the narrow aisles with practiced efficiency. Flight 2847 from Chicago O'Hare to Atlanta Hartsfield was completely full, every seat occupied by travelers eager to reach their destinations. Reginald should have been in business class. His executive assistant had made the booking weeks ago, securing him a comfortable seat at the front of the aircraft where he could stretch his long legs and review documents in relative peace. But a last-minute schedule change had thrown everything into chaos. An emergency board meeting had been called, forcing him to catch an earlier flight, and the only available seat had been here, in the back of the plane, sandwiched between a window and an aisle in the middle section of economy class. His assistant had apologized profusely when she realized the mistake. Reginald had simply smiled and told her not to worry about it. He had flown in worse conditions during his years in the Air Force. A few hours in economy class would not kill him. Besides, he sometimes preferred flying back here. It gave him a chance to observe the airline's operations from the customer's perspective, to see how the crew treated ordinary passengers when they thought no one important was watching. It was a habit he had developed years ago, one that had served him well in identifying problems that never made it into official reports. He pulled a book from his worn leather briefcase and settled it on his lap. The title read, Principles of Aviation Management, in bold letters across the cover, a dense academic text that most people would find utterly boring. Reginald found it fascinating. Even after decades in the industry, he still enjoyed learning, still sought out new perspectives and ideas that could make operations safer, more efficient, more humane. As he opened to his bookmarked page, a memory surfaced unbidden. He was 10 years old again, standing at the chain-link fence of a small regional airport in Mississippi, his fingers wrapped around the wire as he watched a Cessna taxi down the runway. The roar of the engine as it took off had filled his young heart with a longing so intense it almost hurt. He wanted to fly. He wanted to touch the sky, to break free from the dusty streets and limited horizons of his segregated neighborhood. A white security guard had found him there, a heavy-set man with a tobacco-stained mustache and cold eyes. "Get away from here, boy," the man had growled. "This place ain't for your kind." Reginald had run home crying that day, his dreams seemingly crushed before they had even had a chance to take flight. But his father, a janitor who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, had sat him down and said something he would never forget. "They can tell you where you can't stand, Reggie. But they can never tell you where you can't fly. You keep that dream burning, son. You keep it burning so bright they'll have no choice but to see it." 42 years later, that flame still burned. The elderly woman in the window seat beside him shifted, drawing his attention back to the present. Dorothy was her name. She had introduced herself the moment Reginald sat down, a tiny white woman with a cloud of white hair and a kind of warm, crinkled smile that immediately put people at ease. She was 78 years old, she had informed him cheerfully, flying to Atlanta to visit her new great-granddaughter for the first time. "What are you reading, dear?" Dorothy asked, peering at his book with genuine curiosity. "Aviation Management," Reginald replied, showing her the cover. "I find it helps pass the time." "Oh my, that looks terribly complicated," Dorothy said with a gentle laugh. "Are you in the airline business?" Reginald smiled. "Something like that." Across the aisle, a Hispanic family was settling into their seats. A mother and father in their 30s, their two young children bouncing with barely contained excitement at the prospect of flying. The little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, kept pressing her face against the window, asking her father in rapid Spanish when the plane would take off. The boy, a few years older, was trying very hard to look unimpressed, the way boys that age often do when they want to appear grown up. The cabin was a tapestry of humanity, Reginald observed. Business travelers in rumpled suits, college students in sweatshirts and jeans, families with crying babies, elderly couples holding hands. White, black, Hispanic, Asian, all thrown together in this aluminum tube hurtling through the sky at 500 miles per hour. The lead flight attendant, a blonde woman in her early 30s with her name tag reading Melissa, moved through the cabin with crisp efficiency, her smile bright but somehow not quite reaching her eyes. Reginald noticed the way her expression tightened almost imperceptibly when she passed the rows with more diverse passengers, the way her helpful demeanor seemed to dim when addressing anyone who was not white. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people would not consciously register, but Reginald had spent a lifetime learning to read these signals. He made a mental note. Up in the cockpit, a very different man was preparing for the flight. Captain Bradley Whitmore stood before the small mirror in the lavatory, adjusting his already perfect uniform collar with an air of supreme self-satisfaction. At 45, Bradley was the picture of what a pilot should look like, at least according to the old posters from aviation's golden age. His blonde hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. His square jaw was clean-shaven, his blue eyes bright and confident. His uniform fit him like it had been tailored specifically for his athletic frame, and in fact it had been. Bradley came from what he liked to call aviation royalty. His grandfather had been a decorated World War II pilot who had flown bombing missions over Germany. His father had spent 30 years as a captain for Pan Am before retiring with honors and commendations. Flying was in Bradley's blood, he often said. It was his birthright, his destiny. He had grown up in a sprawling house in Connecticut, surrounded by photographs of planes and framed pilots' wings, listening to his father's stories of adventure in the skies. He had never doubted for a moment that he would follow in their footsteps. And he had never had to. His father's connections had opened doors that would have been closed to others. His family's name had smoothed paths that would have been rocky. He had never really had to fight for anything in his career, never had to prove himself against prejudice or overcome systemic obstacles. The thought had simply never occurred to him that others might not have the same advantages. And so he moved through the world with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no, never been made to feel less than, never had to question whether he belonged. He was a good pilot, technically proficient and well-trained. But somewhere along the way, that confidence had curdled into something uglier, something that made him look down on those he perceived as beneath him. "Captain, pre-flight checks are complete," his first officer said, poking his head into the lavatory. "We're ready when you are." Bradley gave his reflection one last approving nod and strode toward the cockpit, his shoes clicking against the floor with authority. Today would be another perfect flight, he was certain of it. After all, he was Bradley Whitmore. Failure was simply not in his vocabulary. The cabin doors closed with a pneumatic hiss, sealing the passengers inside. The safety announcement began playing over the speakers, a recording that Reginald could probably recite from memory after so many years. He settled deeper into his seat, opened his book, and began to read. He had no idea that the next few hours would change multiple lives forever. The Boeing 737 had been in the air for about 45 minutes when Captain Bradley Whitmore decided to take a walk through the cabin. A minor issue with one of the rear lavatory indicators had been reported, nothing serious, probably just a faulty sensor, but Bradley liked to personally inspect any irregularities on his aircraft. It was a habit that made him feel in control, reinforced his sense of authority over every aspect of the flight. He emerged from the cockpit with his shoulders squared and his chin held high, the picture of confident command. The first-class cabin greeted him like an old friend. Here were his people, the successful ones, the ones who had earned their place at the front of the plane through hard work and achievement, or so he believed. He moved among them like a politician working a crowd, shaking hands with businessmen in expensive suits, complimenting a woman on her elegant jewelry, making small talk with practiced ease. "Enjoying the flight, sir?" "Wonderful, wonderful. Let me know if there's anything you need." "Ma'am, that's a beautiful watch. Cartier. Excellent taste. First time flying with us? Well, you picked the right airline. Best pilots in the industry, if I do say so myself." His smile was wide and genuine in first class, his manner warm and engaging. He was Captain Bradley Whitmore, and these were the passengers worthy of his attention. But as he passed through the curtain into economy class, something shifted in his demeanor. His smile thinned, his posture stiffened, and a subtle sneer curled at the corner of his lips. The cabin here was more cramped, the passengers more diverse, the atmosphere less refined. Children were crying somewhere toward the back. A baby needed changing, judging by the smell. People were crammed together like cattle, their cheap luggage stuffed haphazardly into overhead bins. Bradley navigated the narrow aisle with barely concealed distaste, his eyes scanning the passengers with the detached superiority of a man surveying a particularly unpleasant neighborhood he had to pass through. And then his gaze landed on row 34. More specifically, on the black man in 34B. Reginald was absorbed in his book, his gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose as he studied a particularly dense passage about crew resource management. He looked like any other economy-class passenger, unremarkable in his wrinkled jacket and worn shoes. But something about him caught Bradley's attention. Maybe it was the book itself, a serious academic text that seemed out of place in these surroundings. Maybe it was the way Reginald carried himself, with a quiet dignity that did not match his humble appearance. Or maybe it was simply that Bradley had been raised to notice people who looked like Reginald, to categorize them, to make assumptions about where they belonged. He stopped in the aisle, blocking the path of a flight attendant trying to squeeze past with a trash bag. "Well, well," Bradley said, his voice carrying that particular tone of mock friendliness that barely concealed contempt. "That's a pretty advanced book for someone back here." Reginald looked up slowly, his expression neutral. He had heard this tone before, countless times throughout his life. In the Air Force barracks, in corporate boardrooms, in airport lounges, and yes, on airplanes. He knew exactly what it meant. Bradley leaned in slightly, his smile widening into something that looked almost predatory. "You know those words are in English, right?" The comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dorothy, in the window seat, let out a small gasp of shock, her wrinkled hand flying to her chest. The Hispanic family across the aisle fell silent, the parents exchanging worried glances. A businessman in the row behind pretended to be very interested in his in-flight magazine. Reginald met Bradley's eyes calmly, his face betraying nothing of the emotions that churned beneath the surface. He had learned long ago that reacting to provocation was exactly what people like this wanted. They fed on anger, grew stronger from confrontation. The best response was often no response at all. "Thank you for your concern, Captain," Reginald said quietly, his voice steady and measured. "I'm managing just fine." He returned his attention to his book, a clear dismissal. Bradley's smirk faltered for just a moment. He had expected anger, defensiveness, perhaps even fear. This quiet dignity, this refusal to engage, this subtle assertion of equality, it threw him off balance. He felt, absurdly, like he had been the one dismissed, like this shabby black man in economy class had somehow looked down on him. The feeling was unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable. "I didn't mean any offense," Bradley said, though his tone made it clear he absolutely did. "Just making conversation. You don't see a lot of people reading books like that back here," if you know what I mean. Dorothy could not contain herself any longer. Now see here, she began, her voice trembling with indignation. That was completely uncalled for. You have no right to speak to anyone that way, Captain, or not. Reginald gently touched her arm, a calming gesture. It's all right, ma'am. No need to trouble yourself. But Bradley was not finished. Something about Reginald's composure, his refusal to be baited, his quiet dignity, it gnawed at Bradley like a splinter under his skin. He needed to re-establish dominance, to put this man in his place, to reassure himself of the natural order of things as he understood it. He raised his voice slightly, making sure the surrounding passengers could hear. Let me guess. You're sitting back here dreaming of being up front, aren't you? Imagining what it's like in first class. Several passengers were watching now, some with discomfort, others with a kind of ugly anticipation. A few white passengers in nearby rows actually smirked, nodding along with the captain's words as if he were saying what they were all thinking. Bradley leaned closer, close enough that Reginald could smell the coffee on his breath. Some people just aren't meant to fly first class, if you know what I mean. It's nothing personal. It's just the way things are. Different classes of people, different classes of service. Everyone in their place. The words dripped with implication, heavy with generations of prejudice dressed up in the polite language of social hierarchy. It was the kind of racism that hid behind plausible deniability, that could always claim innocence while landing its poisoned blow. The Hispanic mother pulled her children closer, her eyes downcast. She recognized this dynamic, had experienced it herself more times than she could count. The businessman behind Reginald shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. A young white couple a few rows up pretended to be asleep. Reginald closed his book slowly, marking his page with careful precision. He looked up at Bradley again, his dark eyes meeting the captain's blue ones with an intensity that made Bradley want to look away, but pride would not let him. Everyone has their place, Captain, Reginald said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that Bradley could not quite identify. I'm comfortable in mine. It was not a surrender. It was something else entirely, something that Bradley's instincts should have recognized as a warning. But his ego was too large, his assumptions too deeply ingrained, his worldview too narrow to hear what Reginald was really saying. Bradley straightened up, satisfied that he had won this exchange. The black man had backed down, had accepted his inferior position, had confirmed everything Bradley believed about the natural order of the world. Good, Bradley said, his smile returning to its full, patronizing width. Glad we understand each other. Enjoy the rest of your flight. Try not to cause any trouble. He continued down the aisle, leaving a wake of uncomfortable silence behind him. Dorothy reached over and took Reginald's hand, her papery skin warm against his. I am so sorry, dear, she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That was absolutely disgraceful. In all my years of flying, I have never seen such behavior from a captain. You did not deserve that. Thank you, ma'am, Reginald said gently. But I've heard worse. Unfortunately, it's nothing new. That doesn't make it right, Dorothy insisted. Someone should report him. Someone should do something. 2 rows back, a young black man named Jerome Washington gripped his armrests so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. At 24 years old, Jerome was a senior at Georgia Tech, studying aerospace engineering with dreams of becoming a commercial pilot. He had watched the entire exchange with mounting fury, his blood boiling at the injustice of it, at the casual cruelty, at the way the captain had humiliated a man who looked like him, who could have been his father or his uncle or his future self. He started to unbuckle his seatbelt, ready to stand up and confront the captain, to demand an apology, to make a scene if necessary. But Reginald turned around in his seat, as if sensing the young man's intentions, and caught his eye. Slowly, deliberately, Reginald shook his head. The message was clear, not now. Not like this. Jerome sank back into his seat, frustration and helplessness warring in his chest. He did not understand how the older man could be so calm, so composed, in the face of such blatant disrespect. Did he not feel the sting of those words? Did he not burn with the desire for justice? What Jerome did not know, what none of them knew, was that Reginald had learned long ago that the most devastating responses were rarely the immediate ones. True power came from patience, from strategy, from choosing the right moment to act. As the captain disappeared toward the back of the plane, Reginald pulled out his phone. Under the tray table, hidden from view, he typed a short text message to a number he knew by heart. "I'll handle it when we land." Then he opened his email app and began composing a more detailed message, his fingers moving with purpose across the small screen. The subject line read, "Incident Report, Flight 2847. Melissa, the flight attendant, had watched the entire exchange from her station near the galley. She had seen the captain's comments, heard the barely concealed racism in his words. And she had done nothing. Worse, as Bradley passed her on his way back to the cockpit, she had smiled at him, a conspiratorial expression that said she understood, that she agreed, that they were on the same side. "Everything all right, Captain?" she asked sweetly. "Just fine," Bradley replied. "Just reminding some passengers how things work around here." Melissa giggled. "I know exactly what you mean." Neither of them noticed Reginald watching them through the gap between seats, his expression unreadable, his phone still in his hand. The cabin slowly returned to its normal hum of activity, the tension dissipating as passengers went back to their movies and their naps and their whispered conversations. But something had shifted, something invisible but profound. The pieces of a drama had been set in motion, and there would be no stopping them now. Reginald went back to his book, but he was no longer really reading. His mind was elsewhere, planning, calculating, preparing for what was to come. Captain Bradley Whitmore had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just did not know it yet. The Boeing 737 climbed through 35,000 feet, the engines settling into their steady cruise configuration as the plane carved through the clear sky above the Midwest. Captain Bradley Whitmore's voice came over the intercom, smooth and self-assured, the very picture of professional competence. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude and should be arriving in Atlanta right on schedule. Weather looks beautiful for our descent, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Flight attendants, you may begin service." In economy class, the service carts began their slow journey down the narrow aisles, flight attendants dispensing beverages and small packets of pretzels to the passengers. Melissa took the lead position, her cart blocking the aisle as she worked her way methodically through the rows. Her service was impeccable in the forward sections of economy, where the passengers were predominantly white business travelers and young professionals. She smiled, she chatted, she efficiently distributed drinks and snacks with warm efficiency. But as she approached row 34, something changed. "What can I get for you today, ma'am?" Melissa asked Dorothy, her voice still carrying the melody of professional courtesy. "Just a ginger ale, please, dear," Dorothy replied. "And I believe this gentleman would like something as well." She gestured to Reginald, who had closed his book and was waiting patiently for his turn. But Melissa's gaze slid over him as if he were invisible. Without acknowledging him at all, she finished pouring Dorothy's ginger ale and immediately turned to the passengers across the aisle. "For you, sir." "Ma'am?" she asked the Hispanic couple, though her tone had cooled noticeably. Reginald raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me, miss. I would like some water, please." Melissa turned back, her expression hardening almost imperceptibly. Her smile was still there, but it had transformed into something cold and dismissive, like a mask that did not quite fit. "You'll have to wait," she said, her voice clipped. "We serve premium passengers first." Dorothy's mouth fell open. "What on earth? We're in the same row. He's been waiting just as long as I have." "Ma'am, please don't cause a scene," Melissa replied, her tone condescending now, the kind of voice adults use when speaking to misbehaving children. "There's a system. Everyone gets served in their turn. But you just skipped him." Dorothy protested, her indignation rising. "I saw you. You looked right at him and then pretended he wasn't there." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down," Melissa said, louder now, loud enough to attract the attention of nearby passengers. "If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to report this incident to the captain." The threat hung in the air, heavy with implication. Dorothy sputtered, searching for words, but Reginald gently touched her arm. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I can wait." "But it's not right," Dorothy whispered fiercely, her eyes filling with tears of frustration. "It's simply not right." Melissa had already moved on, her cart squeaking down the aisle toward the back of the plane. But she had pressed the call button for the cockpit, a small act of petty revenge against the passengers who had dared to question her. Minutes later, Captain Bradley Whitmore emerged from the flight deck once again. He strode through the cabin with the purposeful gait of a man responding to a crisis, his expression arranged into a mask of concerned authority. But beneath that mask, there was something else, an eagerness, almost a hunger, for confrontation. "I understand there's a disturbance back here," Bradley said, stopping at row 34 and looking down at Reginald and Dorothy. "Is there a problem?" Melissa materialized at his elbow, her expression innocently helpful. "This passenger was being difficult, Captain. He was raising his voice at me, making demands, upsetting the other travelers." The lie was so brazen, so completely divorced from reality, that for a moment Reginald could only stare at her in disbelief. He had said perhaps 20 words total, all of them in a calm and measured tone. He had not raised his voice once. "That's absolutely not true," Dorothy interjected, her voice shaking with outrage. "I was sitting right here. This man did nothing wrong. He simply asked for a glass of water, and your attendant ignored him completely. When I pointed this out, she became rude and threatening." Bradley's eyes flicked to Dorothy, dismissed her instantly, and returned to Reginald. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down and stop harassing my crew." "Captain," Reginald said, his voice steady and clear, "I have not raised my voice. I have not harassed anyone. I asked for water. That is all." "That's not what I'm hearing," Bradley replied, his voice carrying a note of smug authority. He turned to the passengers in surrounding rows. "Did anyone else see this man causing trouble?" The question was posed to the cabin at large, but Bradley's eyes rested on specific passengers, white passengers, passengers he instinctively assumed would support his version of events. And some of them, conditioned by the same unspoken biases, nodded along. "He seemed pretty agitated," muttered a middle-aged man across the aisle, though he had been watching a movie with headphones on during the entire exchange. "Yeah, I heard him raising his voice," added a woman a few rows up, though she had been facing the other direction. Bradley nodded, satisfied. There we have it. The Hispanic mother looked like she wanted to speak up, her eyes meeting Reginald's briefly, but her husband's hand closed over hers in warning. They could not afford trouble, could not afford to be labeled as difficult passengers. They had their children to think about. Jerome, 2 rows back, was practically vibrating with suppressed rage. His hands gripped his knees so tightly they were leaving marks. This was so wrong, so blatantly unjust, and no one was doing anything about it. Bradley leaned down, bringing his face close to Reginald's. "I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen very carefully. One more incident, one more complaint from my crew, and I will have you removed from this aircraft when we land. Security will be waiting at the gate. You'll be put on the no-fly list so fast your head will spin." He smiled then, a cruel expression that did not reach his eyes. "People like you always cause problems. I don't know why, maybe it's in your nature. But not on my plane. Not on my watch. Do you understand?" The phrase, "people like you," echoed in the cabin, its meaning unmistakable. This was not about water or about service or about following rules. This was about skin color, about power, about the kind of casual cruelty that thrives when authority goes unchecked. Reginald looked into Bradley's eyes and saw generations of prejudice staring back at him, confident and unashamed. He saw every teacher who had underestimated him, every officer who had questioned his competence, every executive who had doubted his qualifications. He also saw something else. A man who had never been challenged, never been held accountable, never had to face consequences for his actions. "I understand perfectly, Captain," Reginald said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that made Bradley instinctively lean back. "Better than you know." Bradley straightened up, satisfied that he had established dominance. "Good. Now let's not have any more trouble." He walked back toward the cockpit, Melissa trailing behind him with a smirk of vindication. They had won, their expression said. They had put this troublesome passenger in his place. But as they retreated, Reginald's mind was elsewhere, traveling back through decades of similar moments. He remembered his first day in Air Force basic training, when his drill instructor had taken one look at his black face and declared that he would wash out within a week. He remembered his flight school classmates who refused to partner with him for training exercises. He remembered the passenger who had demanded to see the real pilot when Reginald had walked onto his first commercial flight as captain. Each time, he had felt the burn of injustice, the urge to lash out, to demand recognition of his dignity. And each time, he had heard his father's voice in his head. "They'll try to make you angry, Reggie. That's how they win. You beat them by succeeding. You beat them by rising so high they have no choice but to look up." Reginald had spent his entire life doing exactly that. Rising. Climbing. Proving himself again and again to people who wanted him to fail. And he had made it further than any of them had ever imagined possible. Now it was time to rise once more. Under the cover of his tray table, Reginald composed another email on his phone. This one was longer, more detailed, documenting times and statements and names. He attached it to the previous message and hit send. Then he pulled up another contact, one he rarely used but kept for situations exactly like this. "Janet," the text read, addressing the CEO of United Airlines directly. "We have a situation. Flight 2847. I'll brief you when we land." The response came almost immediately. "Whatever you need. Full authority." Reginald put his phone away and picked up his book again. To anyone watching, he appeared to have returned to his reading, calm and unbothered by the confrontation. But inside, his mind was working with the precision of a chess grandmaster, planning moves and countermoves, anticipating reactions, preparing for the moment when all the pieces would finally fall into place. Dorothy reached over and patted his arm. "Are you all right, dear?" Reginald looked at her and smiled, a genuine expression of warmth despite everything that had happened. "I'm fine, ma'am. Thank you for standing up for me. Not many people would have done that." "Well, it was simply the right thing to do," Dorothy said firmly. "That captain should be ashamed of himself. In all my years, I have never witnessed such disgraceful behavior." "He'll have his chance to be ashamed," Reginald said quietly. "Soon enough." Dorothy looked at him curiously, catching something in his tone that she could not quite identify. There was more to this soft-spoken man in the wrinkled jacket than met the eye. Much more. "Who are you, really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reginald's smile widened slightly. "Just a man who has learned that patience is the most powerful weapon there is." The plane flew on through the clear blue sky, carrying its cargo of ordinary people and extraordinary secrets toward Atlanta. The Boeing 737 touched down at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with a gentle bump, the reverse thrusters roaring momentarily before the plane settled into its taxi toward the gate. Captain Bradley Whitmore's voice came over the intercom one final time, smooth and self-congratulatory. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta, where the local time is 4:37 p.m. We've arrived right on schedule, thanks to some excellent flying conditions and, if I do say so myself, one of the smoothest landings you'll ever experience." In economy class, Reginald Thompson closed his book and slipped it back into his briefcase with the unhurried movements of a man who had all the time in the world. Around him, passengers were already standing, cramming into the aisles, reaching for overhead bins with the impatience of cattle hearing the feedlot gate open. Dorothy gathered her things slowly, her movements stiff from sitting for so long. "Well, dear, I suppose this is where we part ways. I do hope the rest of your day improves. I have a feeling it will, Reginald replied, helping her retrieve a small bag from under the seat in front of her. Thank you again for your kindness. It meant more than you know. Oh, go on, Dorothy said, waving away his gratitude. But she was blushing slightly, pleased to have been appreciated. The passengers began filing toward the front of the plane in the typical slow shuffle of aircraft deplaning. When they reached the exit, Captain Bradley Whitmore was standing at the cockpit door, shaking hands with passengers and accepting compliments on the flight. Thank you for flying with us. Have a great day in Atlanta. Safe travels. Come back and see us. Appreciate you choosing United. When Reginald approached, Bradley's smile took on a sharp, predatory edge. He stepped slightly into Reginald's path, not quite blocking him but making him pause. I hope you learned your lesson today about respecting authority, Bradley said, his voice low enough that only Reginald and the passengers immediately behind him could hear. Some people need to be reminded of their place in the world. Consider this your reminder. Reginald looked into Bradley's eyes, those confident blue eyes that had never known doubt, never questioned their owner's rightful place at the top of the hierarchy. And for the first time since their encounter began, he allowed himself to smile. Not a polite smile. Not a submissive smile. Something else entirely. Oh, I think the lesson is just beginning, Captain, Reginald said, his voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of something that made Bradley's smile falter almost imperceptibly. Enjoy the rest of your day. He walked off the plane before Bradley could respond, leaving the captain with the uncomfortable sensation that he had somehow missed something important, that a joke had been told at his expense that he did not understand. Reginald emerged from the jetway into the bustle of the Atlanta airport terminal and paused for a moment, taking in the familiar chaos of one of the busiest airports in the world. Passengers rushing in all directions, announcements blaring over the PA system, the smell of coffee and fast food mixing in the recycled air. He spotted them immediately. A group of 4 people stood near the arrival board, all wearing nearly identical dark suits, all carrying tablets or folders, all watching the jetway door with the attentive focus of people waiting for someone important. When they saw Reginald emerge, they moved toward him as a unit. Dorothy was walking just behind Reginald, and she noticed the group approaching with curiosity. Oh my, she murmured. That's quite a welcoming committee. Are those people here for you? Before Reginald could answer, the leader of the group reached them. Harrison Wells was a tall white man in his mid-50s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to boardrooms and executive decisions. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his watch was the kind that required a waiting list to purchase. Mr. Thompson, sir, Harrison said, extending his hand with obvious respect. Welcome back. I hope your trip to Chicago went well. It was productive, Reginald replied, shaking his hand. Although the flight home was more eventful than expected. Harrison's expression flickered with concern. Yes, I received your emails. The board meeting is scheduled to begin in 2 hours, but I've arranged for a preliminary briefing if you'd like to address this matter first. Dorothy had stopped walking entirely, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process what she was witnessing. The shabby man from economy class, the one who had been humiliated by the captain, was being greeted by this executive like visiting royalty. I'm sorry, she said, her voice small and confused. But what exactly is happening? Reginald turned to her with a gentle smile. Mrs. Dorothy, I want to thank you again for your kindness on the flight. It's not every day someone has the courage to speak up against injustice. But I don't understand, Dorothy pressed. Who are you? Why are all these people? Harrison cleared his throat. Ma'am, allow me to introduce Reginald Thompson, Executive Vice President of Operations for United Airlines. The words seemed to hang in the air, each one landing with the weight of revelation. Dorothy's hand flew to her chest. Executive Vice President? You mean, you're in charge of? Among other things, I oversee the hiring, training, and discipline of all flight crews, Reginald confirmed. Including captains. Dorothy's eyes went wide as the implication sank in. Oh my lord. That pilot, the one who was so terrible to you, he works for you. Technically, yes. And he had no idea? None whatsoever. A sound escaped Dorothy's throat, somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. Oh, this is rich. This is absolutely wonderful. Wait until I tell my daughter about this. Now let me ask you something. Do you think Reginald should fire Captain Bradley immediately for his behavior? Or do you think there might be a better way to handle this situation, something that creates real change rather than just punishment? Comment number 1 if you think Bradley deserves to be fired on the spot. Comment number 2 if you think Reginald should take a different approach. While you're thinking about that, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And stay with me, because what happens next is going to shock you. Jerome Washington, the young black engineering student from the plane, had been walking past when he recognized Reginald and Dorothy. He slowed, then stopped, watching the scene unfold with growing amazement. The quiet man who had endured such humiliation was actually one of the most powerful executives in the airline industry. "Sir," Harrison continued, handing Reginald a garment bag. "Your suit, as requested. I've also prepared Conference Room A and pulled all relevant personnel files and security footage." Reginald took the bag with a nod. "Thank you, Harrison. Give me 5 minutes to change. Then we begin." He excused himself and walked toward the nearest restroom, leaving Harrison to make small talk with an increasingly bewildered Dorothy. Jerome watched him go, a complicated expression on his face, a mixture of admiration, confusion, and something that might have been hope. When Reginald emerged 5 minutes later, he was transformed. The wrinkled jacket and worn khakis were gone, replaced by a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been made specifically for his frame. Which, of course, it had. His gold-rimmed glasses had been exchanged for sleek designer frames, and a red silk tie complemented the subtle pinstripes of his shirt. On his lapel was a small gold pin bearing the United Airlines logo. He looked like what he was, one of the most powerful executives in American aviation. Dorothy actually gasped when she saw him. "My goodness. You look like a completely different person." "Same person," Reginald said with a slight smile. "Just different clothes." "It's remarkable what a good suit can do," Dorothy marveled. "That captain walked right past you and had no idea he was speaking to his superior. If only he could see you now." "Oh, he will," Reginald said, his voice taking on a quality that made Dorothy shiver slightly. "Very soon." Harrison handed Reginald a tablet displaying a personnel file, and even from a distance, Jerome could see the photograph at the top of the document. Captain Bradley Whitmore's confident face stared out from the screen. "Shall I have security escort Captain Whitmore to the conference room?" Harrison asked. "Please," Reginald replied. "And Harrison? Make sure he doesn't know why he's being summoned. Let him think it's a routine matter." A thin smile crossed Harrison's face. "Of course, sir. With pleasure." Jerome stepped forward, drawn by a force he could not quite name. "Excuse me, sir." Reginald turned, his eyebrows rising slightly as he recognized the young man from the plane. "Yes. I just wanted to say, what happened back there, on the plane, that wasn't right. The way he talked to you. The things he said." Jerome swallowed hard. "I wanted to do something. I wanted to stand up. But you shook your head and I didn't understand why. Now I think maybe I'm starting to understand." Reginald studied the young man for a long moment, seeing something in his eyes that he recognized, the same fire that had burned in his own heart at that age, the same desperate desire for justice in an unjust world. "What's your name, son?" "Jerome Washington, sir. I'm a senior at Georgia Tech Aerospace Engineering. I want to be a pilot someday." Something shifted in Reginald's expression, a softening that only Dorothy was close enough to notice. "A pilot. That's a worthy dream." "Yes, sir. It's all I've ever wanted. But sometimes." Jerome hesitated, then pressed on. Sometimes I wonder if people like me can really make it in this industry. When I see how that captain treated you, and you're a vice president, what chance do I have?" Reginald reached out and placed a hand on Jerome's shoulder. "Every chance in the world, Mr. Washington. Every chance in the world." He turned to Harrison. "Make sure Mr. Washington has a seat in the observation area of the conference room. I want him to see what happens next." Harrison nodded, adding Jerome to his mental checklist without question. Dorothy was practically bouncing with anticipation. "Can I come too? I simply must see how this turns out." Reginald laughed, a warm sound that seemed to surprise even him. "I'm afraid the conference room is for staff only, Mrs. Dorothy. But I promise you, if anything noteworthy happens, I'll make sure you're the first to know." "Well, all right then," Dorothy said, clearly disappointed but mollified by his promise. She rummaged in her purse and produced a business card. "This is my daughter's number. She lives here in Atlanta. You call me the moment there's news, young man." "I mean it." Reginald took the card with genuine warmth. "You have my word." With that, the group began moving toward the United Airlines corporate offices located within the airport complex. Dorothy watched them go, her hand raised in a small wave, her face alight with satisfaction. "Wait until I tell everyone about this," she murmured to herself. "They're never going to believe it." Behind her, unnoticed, Melissa the flight attendant was making her way through the terminal, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to descend on her career. And in the crew lounge, Captain Bradley Whitmore was regaling his colleagues with tales of how he had put a troublesome economy passenger in his place, secure in the knowledge that his position and his privilege made him untouchable. He had no idea how wrong he was. In the executive offices of United Airlines at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson, Harrison Wells was briefing his team with the efficiency of a military operation. Conference Room A had been prepared exactly as Reginald had requested: a long mahogany table, comfortable leather chairs, a large screen display at one end for presentations, and, in a small observation room visible through a one-way mirror, seating for select witnesses. "Pull up Captain Whitmore's complete personnel file," Reginald instructed as he settled into the chair at the head of the table. "And cue the security footage from Flight 2847. I want everything ready before he arrives." Harrison's fingers flew over his tablet. "Already done, sir. We've also pulled the flight attendant's file. Melissa Thornton, 3 years with the company, 2 prior complaints for unprofessional conduct that were dismissed for lack of evidence." "Of course they were," Reginald murmured, his voice carrying a weary familiarity with how such complaints typically disappeared within corporate structures. On the large screen, Captain Bradley Whitmore's personnel file appeared in crisp detail. His official photograph showed the same confident smile, the same square jaw, the same blue eyes that had looked down at Reginald with such contempt. His service record was listed below. 22 years as a commercial pilot, 15 years as captain, numerous commendations for technical proficiency, not a single disciplinary action on record. Looking at the file, you would think Bradley Whitmore was a model employee, the kind of pilot any airline would be proud to have in their cockpit. "Harrison, has anyone ever filed a formal discrimination complaint against Captain Whitmore?" Harrison scrolled through the records. "No formal complaints, sir. But there are several notations from crew members who declined to fly with him again. All vague reasons given. Personal conflicts. Scheduling preferences." He paused. Reading between the lines, the pattern is clear. Reginald nodded slowly. He had seen this pattern countless times throughout his career. The subtle discrimination, the microaggressions, the behavior that was always just deniable enough to avoid consequences. Victims learned not to bother complaining because complaints led nowhere. Perpetrators learned they could act with impunity. "Let me see the security footage," Reginald said. The screen changed to show a split view from 2 cameras inside the aircraft cabin. The footage was remarkably clear, capturing every detail of the encounters between Bradley and Reginald. The audio was slightly muffled but distinguishable. They watched in silence as Bradley stopped at row 34, as his lips moved, forming the words, "You know those words are in English, right?" They watched him return for the second confrontation, watched him threaten Reginald in front of dozens of witnesses, watched the smirks on his face and on Melissa's. "That's all the evidence we need," Harrison said when the footage ended. "Clear misconduct, violation of anti-discrimination policy, creating a hostile environment for passengers. I can have the termination papers prepared within the hour." Reginald was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the frozen image of Bradley's smug face on the screen. "Not yet," he said finally. "First, I want to tell you all a story." The staff members exchanged glances but remained silent, attentive. In 1985, Reginald began, there was a 10-year-old boy in Mississippi who stood at the fence of a small regional airport, watching planes take off. He had never been on an airplane. He had never even been inside an airport terminal. But from the moment he saw that first plane lift off the ground and climb into the sky, he knew what he wanted to do with his life. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. A security guard found him there. A white man who took one look at this black child and decided he did not belong. He told the boy that the airport was not for people like him. Used words I won't repeat. Chased him away like a stray dog. Harrison shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that this story was deeply personal. That boy went home crying. He thought his dream was over before it even began. But his father, a man who worked as a janitor and never finished high school, sat him down and told him something that changed his life. He said, "They can tell you where you can't stand, Reggie. But they can never tell you where you can't fly." The room was utterly silent now. That boy grew up and joined the Air Force. His drill instructors bet against him. His fellow trainees refused to partner with him. His commanders questioned whether he had the intelligence to fly advanced aircraft. Reginald's voice remained level, matter of fact, as if he were reading from a report rather than recounting his own life. He proved them wrong. Every single one of them. He became a fighter pilot. He served his country for 15 years, flying missions in places most Americans have never heard of. When he transitioned to commercial aviation, he started at the bottom, first officer on regional routes. Passengers would see him in the cockpit and ask to speak to the real pilot. Flight attendants would assume he was lost when he walked toward the front of the plane. He kept climbing. Captain. Chief pilot. Director of operations. Vice President. Reginald looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. And now, Executive Vice President of Operations for the largest airline in the world. Responsible for over 15,000 employees. Including every single pilot who flies under the United Airlines banner. He let that sink in for a moment. In 40 years, I have encountered hundreds of men like Bradley Whitmore. Men who look at the color of my skin and make assumptions about my intelligence, my capabilities, my worth as a human being. Men who believe their privilege makes them superior. Men who have never had to fight for anything in their lives because the world handed them everything on a silver platter. Some of those men never changed. They carried their prejudice to their graves. But some of them, a few of them, had their eyes opened. They saw the world differently after someone showed them what they had been blind to. They became better men. Not because they were punished, but because they were educated. Harrison cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, Captain Whitmore's behavior was egregious. The company has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. The appropriate response is termination." "The appropriate response is the one that creates the most change," Reginald countered. "Firing Bradley would feel satisfying. It would be quick and clean and we could all congratulate ourselves on taking a stand against racism. And then Bradley would go to another airline, probably get hired within a month given his experience and connections, and do exactly the same thing to some other passenger who doesn't happen to have the power to fight back." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "I'm not interested in feeling satisfied. I'm interested in results. I'm interested in changing hearts and minds, not just behavior. And I'm interested in building a future where boys like that 10-year-old at the fence don't have to fight as hard as I did." The door to the conference room opened, and a security officer appeared. "Mr. Thompson, Captain Whitmore is here." Reginald straightened his tie and nodded. "Send him in." The next few moments would determine whether Bradley Whitmore could be saved, or whether he was beyond redemption. Only time would tell. Captain Bradley Whitmore strode into Conference Room A with the casual confidence of a man who expected commendation rather than confrontation. His uniform was still crisp despite the long flight, his hair still perfectly arranged, his smile still firmly in place. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, nodding to the assembled staff. "I was told there was some sort of meeting. Bit unusual to be called in right after a flight, but I'm always happy to." His voice trailed off as his gaze reached the head of the table. The blood drained from his face with almost comical speed, leaving his skin a grayish pallor that made his blue eyes look even more prominent. His confident smile froze, trembled, and collapsed. Sitting at the head of the table, in a suit that probably cost more than Bradley's monthly salary, was the passenger from economy class. "What is this?" Bradley's voice came out strangled, uncertain. "What is that man doing here?" "He's a passenger. He caused trouble on my flight. Security should be escorting him out, not." "Captain Whitmore," Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the particular tone of satisfaction that comes from delivering bad news to someone who deserves it, "allow me to introduce Reginald Thompson, Executive Vice President of Operations for United Airlines." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Bradley's mouth moved, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around the room, looking for some indication that this was a joke, a prank, anything other than the nightmare it appeared to be. But the faces of the assembled executives showed only grim professionalism. "Please," Reginald said, gesturing to the empty chair at the far end of the table. "Have a seat, Captain. We have a great deal to discuss." Bradley's legs moved mechanically, carrying him to the indicated chair as if operated by remote control. He sat down heavily, his hands gripping the armrests like a man on a plane experiencing severe turbulence. "Sir, I had no idea who you were," Bradley stammered. "If I had known." "If you had known, you would have treated me differently." Reginald finished. "Yes, I imagine you would have. That's rather the point, isn't it?" He pressed a button, and the large screen came to life, displaying the security footage from the flight. Bradley watched himself approach row 34, watched his own lips form the words that now seemed to echo in the silent conference room. "That's a pretty advanced book for someone back here. You know those words are in English, right? Some people just aren't meant to fly first class, if you know what I mean. People like you always cause problems." Each statement was worse than the last, each one landing like a physical blow as Bradley was forced to confront his own behavior without the comfortable buffer of self-justification. Seeing it from the outside, hearing his own voice dripping with condescension and contempt, he could not deny or rationalize what he had done. "I can explain," Bradley said when the footage ended, though his voice lacked conviction. "By all means," Reginald replied. "Explain to me why you assumed a black man reading a book about aviation management must be barely literate. Explain why you decided that my seat assignment told you everything you needed to know about my worth as a human being. Explain why you threatened me with security and the no-fly list for the crime of asking for a glass of water." Bradley opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The excuses that had always come so easily to him seemed to have evaporated. I thought." "You thought what, Captain?" Reginald's voice was soft, but it cut like a razor. "That because of the color of my skin, because of my wrinkled jacket and worn shoes, I was somehow beneath you. That I was fair game for humiliation. That you could treat me like something you scraped off your shoe because you believed no one would ever hold you accountable." Bradley's face crumpled. For the first time in perhaps his entire life, he was forced to see himself through someone else's eyes, and what he saw was ugly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry." "Sorry you did it? Or sorry you got caught?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Reginald stood and walked slowly around the table until he was standing directly beside Bradley's chair. The captain flinched as if expecting a blow, but Reginald simply pulled out the chair next to him and sat down. "Everyone out," Reginald said quietly. "I want to speak with Captain Whitmore alone." Harrison hesitated. "Sir, is that wise? Perhaps you should have a witness." "I said everyone out." The room emptied quickly, leaving only the two men alone with the frozen image of Bradley's smug face still displayed on the screen. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I'm going to tell you a story," Reginald finally said, "and I want you to really listen. Not formulate excuses or think about how to save your career. Just listen." Bradley nodded numbly. "When I was 10 years old, I stood at the fence of a small airport in Mississippi, watching planes take off. I had never been on a plane. I had never been inside an airport. But from that moment, I knew I wanted to fly. It was the most powerful feeling I had ever experienced." Bradley said nothing, his eyes fixed on the table. "A security guard found me there. A white man who looked at me the way you looked at me today. He told me that the airport was not for people like me. He used the word that people used freely in Mississippi in 1985. He chased me away like I was vermin. I went home and cried for hours. I thought my dream was dead. But my father, a man who cleaned other people's toilets for a living, told me something I have never forgotten. He said they could tell me where I could not stand, but they could never tell me where I could not fly." Reginald turned to face Bradley directly. "I spent the next 40 years proving him right. Air Force pilot. Fighter missions in 3 conflicts. Commercial pilot. Captain. Chief pilot. Executive. Every step of the way, there were men like you. Men who looked at my skin and saw limitation. Men who assumed I did not belong. Men who tried to humiliate me, to break me, to convince me that I should accept a smaller life than the one I was capable of living. I did not let them win. I became twice as good, worked twice as hard, achieved twice as much. And now I sit in an office where I decide the futures of men like you." Bradley finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with something that might have been shame. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand something, Bradley. This is not about me. I have heard worse things than what you said today. I have survived worse treatment. I do not need an apology or a pound of flesh to make myself feel whole. This is about the next person. The next black man or woman or child who crosses your path. The next person you will look at and make assumptions about based on the color of their skin or the clothes they wear or the section of the plane they can afford to sit in. I want you to see them differently. I want you to remember this day and think twice before you speak. I want you to become a better man." Bradley's composure finally broke. Tears began streaming down his face, silent and uncontrolled. "I never thought about it," he said, his voice cracking. "I never had to think about it. My father was a pilot. My grandfather was a pilot. Every door was open to me from the day I was born. I never had to prove myself to anyone. I never had to fight for anything." "I know," Reginald said quietly. "That is exactly the problem. How do I fix it? How do I see things differently?" It was the first genuine question Bradley had asked since entering the room. Not a defense, not an excuse, but an actual plea for guidance from someone who knew things he did not. Reginald studied him for a long moment, weighing what he saw in the man's eyes against decades of experience with human nature. "That depends on you," he finally said. "On whether this is a moment of genuine awakening or just a survival response because your career is on the line." A knock at the door interrupted them. Harrison's voice came through. "Sir, HR is ready with the termination papers whenever you are." Bradley's face went even paler, if that was possible. This was it. The moment of judgment. Reginald stood and walked to the door. But instead of opening it, he simply said, "Hold on, Harrison. We are not finished here." He turned back to face Bradley. "I am not going to fire you today, Captain Whitmore." Bradley stared at Reginald with the expression of a man who had just been told gravity no longer applied. "You're not, what?" "I said I am not going to fire you today," Reginald repeated, settling back into his chair. Termination would be easy. It would feel good. Everyone would congratulate themselves on taking a stand against racism, file the appropriate reports, and move on with their lives. And nothing would change. You would go to another airline, get hired within weeks based on your experience and your family name, and do exactly the same thing to some other passenger who does not have the power to fight back. The cycle would continue. The system would remain intact. Bradley was shaking his head slowly, not in disagreement but in disbelief. "I don't understand. After everything I said to you, after the way I treated you, you're just going to let me go." "I did not say I was letting you go. I said I am not going to fire you." Reginald leaned forward. "There is a difference." "What kind of difference?" "The kind that requires you to actually change. The kind that might be harder than losing your job." For the first time since the nightmare began, a spark of something other than fear appeared in Bradley's eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. Or hope. "Tell me what you mean." Reginald nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "Let me ask you something first, Bradley. And I want you to think carefully before you answer. Why do you think you deserve to be a captain?" Bradley's brow furrowed. Because I earned it. I put in the hours. I passed all the tests. I have an exemplary safety record." "All true. But those are qualifications. I asked why you think you deserve it." The question seemed to confuse Bradley even more. "I don't understand the distinction." "Then let me put it another way. When you applied for your first pilot position, did you ever worry that you would not get it because of how you look? When you walked into the interview, did you wonder if the people behind the desk would see your face and make assumptions about your intelligence or your capabilities? When you sat down to take your certification exams, did you have a voice in the back of your head telling you that you needed to score higher than everyone else just to be considered equal?" Bradley was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally admitted. "I never thought about any of that. Because you never had to. Your father was a pilot. Your grandfather was a pilot. You grew up assuming that flying was your birthright, your destiny. Every door opened before you even reached for the handle. Every person you encountered assumed you belonged until you proved otherwise. I had to prove I belonged every single day of my career. Every flight, every meeting, every promotion. I was never given the benefit of the doubt. I was never assumed to be competent. I had to demonstrate my worth again and again, to people who often did not want to see it even when it was right in front of their faces." Bradley's face had gone through several transformations during this speech, from confusion to discomfort to something that looked almost like pain. "I never thought about it that way," he said quietly. I mean, I knew racism existed, in the abstract. But I never really understood what it meant. What it actually felt like. How could you? You have never experienced it. You have never had someone look at you and see a category instead of a person. You have never walked into a room and felt the assumptions settle over you like a weight." Reginald paused, letting his words sink in. "But that does not make you a bad person, Bradley. It makes you a product of your circumstances, just as I am a product of mine. The difference is that I was forced to understand your world in order to survive in it. You were never forced to understand mine." Bradley was crying again, but differently this time. Not the panicked tears of a man watching his career crumble, but something deeper, more genuine. "My whole life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I thought I was a good person. I never called anyone those words. I never participated in. I mean, I was not a member of any hate group or anything like that. I thought that was enough. I thought not being actively hateful meant I was on the right side. And today I sat there and listened to myself on that video, and I heard the contempt in my own voice. I heard the cruelty. And I realized that I have been telling myself a story about who I am that was completely divorced from reality. Reginald nodded slowly. That realization is the first step. The question is what you do with it. What can I do? How do I make this right? You cannot make this specific incident right. What happened on that plane happened. The humiliation I felt, the humiliation other passengers of color felt watching you treat me that way, that cannot be undone. What you can do is ensure it never happens again. Not by me, and not by anyone else you encounter for the rest of your life. You can use this moment as a turning point rather than just a bad memory you try to forget. Bradley wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. How? By listening. By learning. By seeking out the perspectives you have been able to ignore your whole life. By using the considerable privilege you have been given to lift others up rather than pushing them down. And most importantly, by passing on what you learn. You have influence, Bradley. Younger pilots look up to you. Crew members follow your lead. You can either use that influence to perpetuate the same patterns that have existed for generations, or you can use it to create change. There was a long silence as Bradley absorbed all of this. Finally, he looked up at Reginald with something new in his eyes, a determination that had not been there before. Tell me specifically what you want me to do. Whatever it is, I will do it. Reginald allowed himself a small smile. This was the response he had been hoping for, the indication that Bradley might actually be capable of growth. I have some conditions for your continued employment at United Airlines. They will not be easy. They will require you to step outside your comfort zone, to confront your own biases honestly, to put in work that you have never had to put in before. Name them. First, you will be demoted to first officer for a period of 12 months. This is not optional. During that time, you will fly under the command of other captains, and you will learn what it feels like to be in a subordinate position, to have someone else make the decisions, to follow rather than lead. Bradley winced but nodded. Okay. Second, you will participate in an intensive diversity and inclusion training program. Not the standard 2-hour online course that most employees click through while doing other things. A 6-month program that includes personal coaching, group discussions, and ongoing evaluation. You will take it seriously, or you will be terminated. I understand. Third, during those 12 months, you will be assigned to fly exclusively with captains of color. Black, Hispanic, Asian, it does not matter. The point is for you to spend significant time working under the leadership of people who have had to overcome the kinds of obstacles you have never faced. You will listen to their stories. You will learn from their experiences. Bradley's eyes were wide, but he nodded again. Yes. Yes, I can do that. And fourth. Reginald paused for effect. There is someone I want you to meet. Reginald walked to the conference room door and opened it. Harrison was waiting outside, along with several other staff members who had been listening with varying degrees of satisfaction to the conversation within. Send in Mr. Washington, Reginald said. A moment later, Jerome entered the room, looking uncertain but trying to project confidence. His Georgia Tech sweatshirt suddenly seemed out of place among all the suits, but he held his head high. Bradley looked at the young black man with confusion. Who is this? This is Jerome Washington. He was on our flight today. He was sitting 2 rows behind us, watching everything that happened, watching you humiliate me in front of dozens of passengers. Jerome's jaw tightened at the memory, but he said nothing. Jerome is a senior at Georgia Tech, studying aerospace engineering. His dream is to become a commercial pilot. He has the grades, the aptitude, and the determination to make that dream a reality. Reginald placed a hand on Jerome's shoulder. He also has something else. He has watched people like you his entire life. People who look at him and see limitations instead of potential. People who assume he does not belong in the cockpit before he has even had a chance to prove himself. Jerome is the 5th condition of your continued employment, Bradley. For the next 2 years, you will personally mentor this young man. You will guide him through the application process for flight school. You will write his recommendation letters. You will use your connections, the same connections that opened every door for you, to ensure he gets the opportunities he deserves. Bradley stared at Jerome, then back at Reginald. You want me to mentor him? I want you to invest in his success the way the world invested in yours. I want you to experience what it means to lift someone up instead of pushing them down. And I want Jerome to have an advocate in this industry, someone who understands the obstacles he will face and is committed to helping him overcome them. Jerome finally spoke, his voice tight with conflicted emotions. I don't need anyone's pity. I can make it on my own. Reginald turned to him with understanding eyes. I know you can. I made it on my own, against worse odds than you will face. But that does not mean you should have to. And this is not pity, Jerome. This is justice. I spent my entire career proving that black men belong in the cockpit. I should not have had to prove it. The opportunity should have been given to me the same way it was given to men like Bradley. Since that did not happen for me, I am going to make sure it happens for you. Bradley stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on Jerome with an intensity that was uncomfortable but not hostile. Mr. Washington, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I cannot undo what happened on that plane. I cannot take back the things I said or the way I made people feel. But if you will let me, I would like to try to make things right. Why should I trust you? Jerome asked bluntly. An hour ago you were threatening to have a black man arrested for asking for water. Now you want to be my mentor. Why should I believe anything has changed? It was a fair question, and Bradley did not have an easy answer for it. You should not trust me, he admitted. I have not earned your trust. But I am asking you to give me the chance to earn it. Not for my sake. For yours. Jerome looked at Reginald, searching for guidance. The older man nodded almost imperceptibly. Actions speak louder than words, Captain, Jerome said finally. You want to mentor me? Fine. But I am going to hold you accountable. Every promise you make, every commitment you take on, I am going to make sure you follow through. And if you ever treat anyone the way you treated Mr. Thompson today, I will personally make sure it becomes national news. A ghost of a smile crossed Bradley's face. Fair enough, Mr. Washington. Fair enough. He extended his hand. Jerome looked at it for a long moment, the weight of the decision evident in his expression. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook it. Do not make me regret this, Jerome said. I will try my hardest not to. Reginald watched the exchange with a complex mixture of emotions. Hope and skepticism, satisfaction and caution. He had seen these moments before, these apparent transformations. Some of them had been genuine. Others had faded as soon as the immediate consequences disappeared. There is one more piece of business to attend to, he said, his voice hardening. Flight attendant Melissa Thornton. Harrison nodded and opened the door again. Melissa entered the room with considerably less confidence than Bradley had displayed earlier. She had clearly been informed of the general nature of the meeting, and her face was pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Miss Thornton, Reginald said, not bothering to offer her a seat. I reviewed the footage of your behavior on Flight 2847. Unlike Captain Whitmore, you were not acting from a position of ignorance or unconscious bias. You deliberately lied to the captain about my behavior. You fabricated a complaint to get me in trouble. You smiled and laughed while a colleague was publicly humiliating a passenger. Melissa's mouth opened as if to offer an excuse, but Reginald held up his hand. This is not a discussion. Your employment with United Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the premises and will not be eligible for rehire. HR will provide you with the details of your final compensation and the return of any company property. Melissa's face crumpled. Sir, please, I was just following the captain's lead. I did not mean any harm. I have a mortgage. I have student loans. You cannot just. Miss Thornton, Captain Whitmore was operating from a place of ignorance. Destructive ignorance, yes, but ignorance nonetheless. You operated from a place of active malice. You saw an opportunity to harm someone and you took it, with full knowledge of what you were doing. There is no rehabilitation program for cruelty. There is no mentorship that can fix a fundamental lack of character. You are done here. 2 security officers appeared in the doorway. Melissa looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, finding none. "This is not fair," she said, her voice rising. "You are firing me but keeping him. He was the one who started it. He was the one who—" "Escort her out," Reginald said quietly. As Melissa was led away, her protests echoing down the hallway, Bradley watched with an expression that was difficult to read. "That could have been me," he said finally. "Yes," Reginald agreed. "It could have been. Remember that." The conference room fell silent. The drama was over, the decisions made, the consequences distributed. But for everyone present, the real work was just beginning. Reginald turned to look out the window, watching as a United Airlines jet lifted off from the runway, climbing into the Atlanta sky. "When I was 10 years old," he said softly, almost to himself, "I stood at a fence and watched planes take off. I promised myself that one day I would touch the sky. And I did. But the world has not changed as much as I hoped it would. There are still fences. There are still guards telling black children they do not belong. There are still assumptions and prejudices and systems designed to keep certain people in their place." He turned back to face the room. "I cannot tear down all those fences myself. But I can make sure that every day, I am reaching back to help someone else climb over. That is the real work. That is what makes all of this mean something." Jerome was watching him with an expression of something like reverence. Bradley was watching with something that might have been shame, or might have been the first stirrings of genuine respect. "Mr. Thompson," Bradley said, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But someday, when I have proved myself, when I have become the kind of man who deserves to be listened to, would you be willing to tell me more about your story? About how you got where you are? I think I have a lot to learn." Reginald considered the question for a long moment. "When you have proved yourself," he said finally, "I will tell you whatever you want to know. But proving yourself will take time. Years, maybe. You have a lot of work to do, Captain Whitmore. I suggest you get started." Bradley nodded. "Yes, sir. I will not let you down." "Do not let yourself down," Reginald corrected. "That is the only standard that matters in the end." 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the United Airlines pilot briefing room at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Captain Bradley Whitmore, recently reinstated to his former rank after completing every requirement of his rehabilitation program, stood at the front of the room addressing a group of new pilot trainees. "There is something I want to tell you all before we begin today's session," he said, his voice carrying a quality that had not been there a year ago, a humility that came from genuine experience rather than performative modesty. 12 months ago, I was demoted from captain to first officer. I deserved it. I had spent my entire career believing that my position was something I was entitled to rather than something I needed to earn every day. I treated passengers and colleagues with contempt based on nothing more than the color of their skin or their seat assignment. I was cruel, and I was wrong." The trainees shifted uncomfortably, not sure where this was going. "I am telling you this because this industry will give you power. The uniform, the authority, the respect that comes with the title of captain, all of it can be intoxicating. It can make you forget that the people sitting in the back of the plane are human beings who deserve dignity. It can make you think you are better than them. You are not. None of us are. We are all just people, doing our best, trying to get where we need to go. The moment you forget that is the moment you stop being fit to wear these wings." He looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "I was lucky. I was given a second chance by a man I had treated with unforgivable disrespect. A man who had every right and every reason to destroy my career but chose instead to try to make me better. I am still trying to live up to the faith he showed in me that day. I probably will be for the rest of my life. After the session, Bradley walked across the terminal to the employee cafeteria, where a young man in a brand new first officer's uniform was waiting for him at a corner table. Jerome Washington looked up as Bradley approached, a smile breaking across his face. Captain Whitmore. Or should I say, mentor extraordinaire. Bradley laughed, a genuine sound that would have been impossible for him a year ago. Jerome. Or should I say, the youngest pilot to complete United's training program in company history. They shook hands warmly, a far cry from the tense, reluctant handshake they had exchanged in the conference room 12 months earlier. Hard to believe it has been a year, Jerome said as they sat down. Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find out this was all a dream. How does it feel? Having your wings. Jerome touched the insignia on his chest with something like wonder. Like everything I ever wanted. Like standing at the top of a mountain I have been climbing my whole life. He paused. And also terrifying. The responsibility, the knowledge that people are trusting me with their lives. It is a lot. It should feel like a lot, Bradley said seriously. The day it does not feel like a lot is the day you need to walk away. This job requires everything you have, every flight, every decision. Never let it become routine. That sounds like something Mr. Thompson would say. It is. He told me that during one of our conversations. Among many other things. Jerome nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. He changed your life, did he not? He saved my life, Bradley corrected. The person I was before, the person who could humiliate a stranger on an airplane and feel good about it, that person was headed somewhere dark. Reginald Thompson pulled me back from the edge. I will never be able to repay him for that. You can repay him by paying it forward, Jerome said. That is what he told me. The only way to repay the people who lift you up is to lift someone else. As if on cue, a family walked past their table. Parents in their 30s, two young children bouncing with excitement. And trailing behind them, a small black boy of about 8 or 9, his face pressed against every window that offered a view of the aircraft on the tarmac. Bradley watched the boy for a moment, then stood up. Excuse me, he said, approaching the family. I could not help noticing your son seems interested in the planes. The parents looked uncertain, protective. It was, after all, a stranger in uniform approaching their child. My name is Captain Bradley Whitmore, he continued, showing his identification. I fly for United Airlines. If it would be okay with you, I would love to give your son a quick tour of the cockpit before we close the door for our next flight. I remember what it was like to be his age, dreaming about airplanes. The parents exchanged glances, then looked at their son, whose eyes had gone wide with hope. Can I, Mom? Please. The mother smiled. Well, if Captain Whitmore does not mind. It would be my honor, Bradley said, extending his hand to the boy. What is your name, young man? Marcus, the boy said shyly. Marcus Johnson. Well, Marcus Johnson, let me tell you something. You see that plane out there? That big beautiful machine. There is no reason in the world why you cannot fly one someday. None at all. Jerome watched from the table as Bradley led the boy toward the gate, explaining the parts of the aircraft visible through the windows, answering the rapid-fire questions that only excited children can generate. There was a gentleness to Bradley now, a patience, that would have been unthinkable from the man Jerome had first encountered on Flight 2847. His phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced down and smiled. It was from Reginald Thompson. Heard you got your wings yesterday. Proud of you, son. The sky is yours now. Make it count. Attached to the message was a photograph. 2 images side by side. On the left, a faded black and white photo of a young black boy standing at a chain-link fence, gazing at distant airplanes with longing in his eyes. On the right, a recent photograph of Jerome in his new uniform, standing in front of a United Airlines jet with his wings gleaming in the sunlight. Below the photos, Reginald had written, 1985 to 2024. The dream continues. Jerome felt tears prick at his eyes. He thought about everything that had brought him to this moment, the struggles and the setbacks, the doubters, and the doors that had nearly been closed in his face. He thought about a man in a wrinkled jacket who had endured humiliation with quiet dignity because he knew that the real victory was still to come. He thought about fences and dreams and the long, hard work of making the world a little bit better, one changed heart at a time. Bradley returned with young Marcus, whose face was now lit up with a joy that would probably stay with him for the rest of his life. "Thank you, Captain," Marcus called as his parents led him away. "I am going to be a pilot just like you someday." "I believe you, Marcus," Bradley called back. "I believe you will." He sat back down across from Jerome, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "That kid," Jerome finally said. "He reminds me of someone." "He reminds me of everyone who ever looked at the sky and wanted to touch it," Bradley replied. "He reminds me of what I forgot and had to learn all over again. That this job is not about power or prestige. It is about keeping dreams alive." The PA system crackled overhead. "Flight 2847 to Chicago, now boarding at gate B12. Jerome stood up, straightening his uniform. "That is me. First solo flight." Bradley stood as well, extending his hand. "You are going to be great, Jerome. I know it." They shook hands one more time, and then Jerome was walking toward the gate, toward the plane, toward the future he had earned through talent and perseverance and the help of people who believed in him. In his executive office high above the terminal, Reginald Thompson stood at the window, watching the planes take off and land in their endless dance. On his desk sat 2 framed photographs. The old black and white image of himself at the fence, and a new photo that had arrived that morning, showing Bradley, Jerome, and young Marcus standing together in the cockpit of a United Airlines jet, all 3 of them smiling. Dorothy had kept her promise. She had called within days of the incident, and they had spoken several times since then. Her grandson, the journalist, had wanted to write the story, but Reginald had declined. "This story is not about me," he had told her. "It is about every little black boy standing at the fence, dreaming of the sky. It is about the ones who came before and the ones who will come after. It is about the long, slow work of changing hearts and minds, one person at a time." Dorothy had understood. She had sent him cookies instead, homemade chocolate chip, with a note that said simply, "Thank you for restoring my faith in humanity." A plane lifted off outside his window, climbing higher and higher until it disappeared into the clouds. Reginald smiled. The dream continued. "Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of Reginald's decision not to fire Bradley immediately? Do you believe people can truly change, or do you think Bradley will eventually slip back into old habits? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you hope, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, no matter who you are, no matter where you started, the sky belongs to you too. Keep dreaming. Keep climbing. And never let anyone tell you where you cannot fly. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. This powerful story teaches us several profound lessons about racism, dignity, and the possibility of transformation. First, never judge anyone by their appearance or circumstances. Reginald sat in economy class wearing wrinkled clothes, yet he held more power than anyone on that plane could have imagined. The world is full of people whose true worth remains hidden beneath modest exteriors. When we make assumptions based on skin color, clothing, or seat assignments, we reveal our own ignorance, not their limitations. Second, patience and composure are often more powerful than immediate reaction. Reginald could have revealed his identity the moment Bradley insulted him. Instead, he waited for the right moment, turning humiliation into an opportunity for lasting change. True strength is not about winning arguments but about achieving meaningful outcomes. Third, punishment without education changes nothing. Reginald understood that firing Bradley would only move the problem elsewhere. By choosing rehabilitation over termination, he created the possibility for genuine transformation. Sometimes the hardest path leads to the greatest results. Fourth, privilege is invisible to those who have it. Bradley never questioned his advantages because he never had to. Understanding our own blind spots requires deliberate effort and uncomfortable self-examination. Finally, the best way to honor those who lifted us up is by reaching back to lift others. Reginald demanded that Bradley mentor Jerome, transforming an act of cruelty into an opportunity for the next generation. That is how real change happens, one relationship at a time. Now I want to hear your voice. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly because of how they looked? Have you ever been that person? What would you have done in Reginald's position? Fire Bradley immediately or give him a chance to change? Drop your answer in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who is going through something similar right now. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about judgment and second chances, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover messages like this one. Subscribe to our channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss stories that challenge us to become better human beings. And please, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose perspective might shift because you took that small action. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in growth, justice, and the power of dignity. May you always have the courage to stand tall in the face of disrespect, the wisdom to choose your battles carefully, and the grace to help others rise even when they have tried to push you down. Until next time, keep your dreams alive and never let anyone tell you where you cannot fly.